specific decision.
And Senator Reed, but always be kind.
Okay, committee,
Those are
yes,
the
we've all found the interesting papers. Um, Julia,
Yes.
we already. Okay, this has been too easy. The tax department just told me they have two technical changes that are highly non-controversial, so we're gonna find 10 minutes to get them in whenever we have 10 minutes. So we will see where we go, but this is property tax class calculation.
Yes.
And this is calculations in the future state.
Sort of. So,
Okay.
so for the record, Julia Rector, Joint Fiscal Office. What we're looking at here for the next hour or so, is I was asked to do some modeling about property tax calculations if there were a uniform rate. So essentially, before going into the two printouts, I worked with tax to come up with some consensus underlying assumptions for calculating these rates. And essentially what we did here was to calculate if there had been a uniform rate in fiscal year 2025, what was the uniform rate then? And then compare that in terms of a difference, because this committee is, and the bill is contemplating some sort of uniform rates. One big piece of this, or a couple big pieces of the assumptions before going into the printouts that I want to name are that they're estimates only, they don't reflect future years. They're based on the Senate education construct of the foundation formula. No, sorry, let me take a step back. They're not based on the Senate Ed calculation of the foundation formula. Essentially what we did is we used our FY25 yield model. That was all of the information and data that we had when the General Assembly set the FY25 rates.
Okay.
So we said, this is what the General Assembly was looking at in terms of revenues, expenses, what was the uniform rates.
Okay, so for discussion purposes, because we can't do this with the future until we set the districts. We know what the tax base is. We, know what the weights and what the base and what the transportation money is, all of it's going to be. So what you did is you say, this year, given this year's school spending, this year's everything, if we gone to a uniform rate, this is what the uniform rate would look like.
Precisely, and we did the education spending that is underlined here, is the same education spending estimate that the General Assembly had on May 10th when you all closed out and set the yields and rates. So it was about $2 million higher than where it ended up coming in. But this allows us to have an apples to apples comparison because all of that data was what was used instead of
So there was no 77 million of buy down figured into
the same buy downs that were used in FY25 are being used here in the current.
Okay,
All
so
is here.
this assumes that the 77 million. So next year, unless we find another 100 million, if we did it next year, we couldn't.
This is looking at FY25, not FY25.
Current year,
Oh,
not next year.
current
The 77
Okay.
million is next year.
So, okay, so next year, if everything remains the same, this is what it will look like.
Mhm.
This is what your next tax bill that you're going to get mailed in July will look like.
This is if there had been uniform rates in fiscal year 25, what would the uniform rates have been? The final caveat that I will add on this note is that you'll recall the transition of Act 127 included a cent discount right? For districts that lost tax capacity, they got a corresponding number of cents off of their tax rate. So that we could have an apples to apples comparison, I applied the cent discount in all of the districts, the same discount that they received in current law, so we
This
can
is
have an
the
apples to
phase-in
apples.
of the present weighting system.
Yep,
And then you got to step down for 3 years or 5 years.
I'm looking at Jake, 5 years, I believe.
Who knows?
The Act for 27 cent discount was a step down.
Already years. How many years did we phase in the new weights?
In after Act 46. It was 5 years, I believe.
That's what I thought. We stepped it. In the end, all right, after all the 10% cap. But
So there's two printouts on the committee page under my name. The relatively similar, this first printout that I'm gonna share, is modeling of a uniform tax rate compared to FY 25. So it's the one that has columns A through I. Go ahead and share my screen.
The really tiny print.
The tiny print, yes, because I have more columns to fit onto the same size paper. Sorry. So that's what we're looking at here. So essentially what we're doing here is just walking through the spreadsheet. We've got county in column A, districts in column B. You'll note that perhaps because we have districts that span multiple counties, the county they're assigned to is just consistent with however AOE has coded the data. Column C, this represents if there were a uniform rate in fiscal year 25 for homestead and non-homestead. So completely doing away with homestead and non-homestead classification and instead setting one property tax rate. These are all equalized rates, one equalized property tax rate across the state for all taxable property. Which is estimated to be $1.373. You see, for instance, that there are some districts that are not consistent with the $3.73, for instance, Addison Central, and the reason is what we just spoke about, the discounts have been applied, so there's apples to apples for the homestead rate.
Okay.
Columns D, E, and F are representing the homestead rate comparison. So column D is representing the district's equalized FY 25 homestead rate. And then columns E and F are your comparison columns. So E is showing you that relative percent difference between the uniform rate of $1.373 and the current law equalized rate. And you also see in column F the dollar difference. So just two different ways of capturing the difference. I tried to keep the formatting consistent with some of the other charts that we're looking at. So blue cells are representing a decrease in their tax rate, while white are representing an increase. Columns G, H, and I, these are non-homestead. This is perhaps a little redundant, but I thought it would be helpful to show here. What you're seeing is you're bringing down the non-homestead rate when going to a uniform rate compared to the current law non-homestead rate. So the current law non-homestead rate in FY 25 was $1.391. When comparing that against $1.373, I close to seeing it. So this is another way of looking at how different districts would be impacted under different scenarios. The piece that's worth noting is you'll recall that the homestead rate is locally adjusted under current law based on a district's per pupil spending. Right? So what you're seeing here is districts that have higher per pupil spending, education spending for long-term weighted ADM, are going to be seeing a relative decrease. Whereas districts with lower per pupil spending are going to be seeing a relative increase because you're bringing everyone to one uniform rate.
Julia, on G, looking over at the non-homestead, G, H, and I,
Mhm.
why wouldn't those all be down 2 cents? What, there's some that aren't, and why is that?
Because applied the step district discount, we're looking at one uniform rate.
Yeah.
For homestead and non-homestead. So for the districts, the entire uniform rate had the said discount applied against it. So you're looking at here in Addison Central, for instance, that
Yeah.
top row,
Okay,
the uniform rate is $1.373 minus the cents that they are awarded for the Act 127 transition. That $2.43 would be applied for all properties, including for non-homestead properties.
oh. Okay,
That's a modeling decision. That was a modeling decision to
Yeah.
get to apples. So far, there hasn't been discussion of how cents would be contemplated.
but in current law, when we,
In current laws, only for the homestead rate,
okay.
but the
that's-
modeling choice is,
Yeah,
do you completely disregard the cent discounts? So that your homestead are not apples to apples? Or do you include the cent discount for the uniform rate? To get the apples to apples homestead, but then you're seeing a corresponding bigger decrease in the districts that would get the decrease.
okay, thank you, I just want to make sure I understood.
This is not necessarily the future state. This is what a uniform statewide tax rate would look like in a modeling that has held everything as equal to present day reality as it is possible to do.
Mhm.
There are few tweaks, but we decided last week that when the House version took the weights, the cost-based weights, they came out with a higher number of spending than we are presently spending. And I think the understanding was that's because some schools were not using their additional taxing capacity to add service to certain students. They were using it to hold down their tax rate. And so I remember we had the discussion that once you assume that all these services will be delivered to every student that gets them, that for those schools that haven't been doing it or been holding their rates down, probably because most of them are poorer communities, then they would see a tax increase when you went to a statewide base. But we have a transition in the Senate bill that would step up or step down in equal amounts, so they should hopefully kind of walk the school spending so that no school, these are not stepped because we haven't done a transition of step up, step down, or putting extra money in or anything. This is just if we do nothing.
Yeah, and
This is what it would look like.
Yeah, this is really just looking at what a uniform rate would have looked like in FY 25. I did see on your agenda, you've got transition mechanism on Wednesday, I believe. But to your point, Madam Chair, that's correct. The Senate version has the foundation formula transition mechanism. There's no tax transition mechanism, which would be a policy decision. And first, before doing any sort of analysis or thinking through that, one of the big questions is, well, what tax would the transition be to? Right? So this is looking at if there was a rate uniform across homestead and non-homestead property. And then the other printout on the committee page under my name is similar, or I would say all of the same underlying assumptions. The only difference in this modeling is saying, what if the homestead rate were to be replaced with a uniform rate, but the non-homestead rate in FY25 were to be maintained at $3.91. So you're maintaining the two property classes. You've got non-homestead where you're maintaining the FY25 non-homestead rate and saying, what would the uniform rate be if we were trying to make up the same amount from homestead? So what we're seeing here is that because the non-homestead rate is higher than the homestead rate on average under current law, the non-homestead rates would continue to be making up a larger piece of that pie if you were to maintain the FY25 non-homestead rate.
Yeah.
So what we're looking at here is column C. This is reflecting if you were only to replace the homestead property tax instead of using your locally adjusted ed spending per pupil homestead rate and move to a uniform homestead rate, it would be about, or model to be $3.52. So you see that that's coming down because homestead is not making up as large of a share in this. D, column D, there's your current law, Y25 rate. E and F, these are those changes, the relative percent difference and the dollar difference. And again, what you're seeing here is that districts who have, compared to the rest of the state, districts that have higher per rated pupil spending under current law have higher tax rates. Moving to a uniform is going to be bringing that tax rate down, whereas districts that under current law have lower per weighted pupil spending are going to have their tax rates brought up to a uniform rate.
And if I could build on that, how I'm interpreting this, overlaying it with the other table from Ezra on which districts are getting more money, it tracks consistently. So the districts that are getting more money are seeing a property tax increase. The districts that will be getting less money are seeing a property tax decrease.
And that intuition makes
Yep.
a lot of sense. Yes. Right. Because you have your lower spending districts being brought up. So they're getting more money. And your lower spending districts under current law have a lower rate because they're lower spending
Okay,
with it being brought up. And then the same intuition holding true for your higher spending districts.
until we get the final districts and what the spending is at that point. This is illustrative only. It sounds like the levers we can pull to adjust that. We can put more money in somewhere. We can always do that. Or when we separated homestead and non-homestead in Act 60, which was probably the first session after this, we set the non-homestead at a higher rate. Because they wouldn't, their argument was they didn't get to vote on school taxes, and so they shouldn't have to pay for what they didn't have a voice in. And they have crossed in places, if not in most places. So we can always adjust the rate, which I believe is what the study we just agreed upon is going to look at. If you just keep it at homestead, non-homestead, and if you do, how do you set the homestead based on school spending right now? We're just taking what it costs to raise enough money to pay the base and the weights, and categorical and whatever else. But we could also adjust the non-homestead rates. Either one or more than one rate. And we could, because I think also in Act 60, your taxes couldn't go up or down more than a certain percent. I'm missing my mutants here. But I think there was
percent for a certain number of years. I don't know.
yeah, I don't know what it was, but I know I had towns that went from 28 cents to $1.10, and that was something of a sticker shock. So it was phased in. I don't remember how we paid for it. But that is all, we can transition. We can play with the non-homestead rates.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, in terms of thinking through some of the initial decision points, when moving, if the decision is to move to a foundation formula, the way that the homestead property tax rate is calculated will no longer work under a foundation formula, because the homestead property tax rate is calculated based on a local spending adjustment. Right? Once you walk away from the local spending adjustment and the homestead property yield, then there's the question of what fits into this in that stead. So I know you just agreed on the property classification study. Then the question is, do you put in something now of how the homestead rate is going to be set? Is there a uniform homestead rate and uniform non-homestead rate? Is there one uniform rate? Okay.
And I'm probably remiss, I think it's been put up. Julia and everybody have done this memo, which lists the big decision points we have to make and the questions we have to answer. And so
And that memo, if I may, is really some of those high level decisions,
Yes.
but then within each of those decisions, the minute that you go down one path, there likely will be other underlying questions that would need to be answered in order to get to the level of detail necessary for language and or modeling.
Just a quick clarifying question, Shereen. I'm looking at this one right here. I think that's one that's on the board. What did you use for weights in here? Is this what came out of Senate Ed or what came?
I did not use any of the proposals, because what this is doing is what would a uniform rate have been in FY 25?
Weights are for how the money goes out. They don't apply to how the money.
Correct.
State,
Okay,
right?
Correct.
okay, thank you.
yeah, this is what your tax bill would have been
Put it that.
if we
Yeah.
just went.
Okay.
So we
to the
know,
uniform rates.
so we know that, to get into why we did it, why we did this, why we landed to do the modeling this way. At first, it's an easy question, right? What would the rates have been under the Senate Ed project or under the House project? But then there's the question of which revenues do we use? At what point are we booking certain revenues? Which spending decisions do we use? What is the cost of income sensitivity or the property tax credit? So this is a way of getting apples to apples.
And this is based on present day income sensitivity program.
Right, under both proposals, it's the same cost of income sensitivity. Everything is the same. It's just what was the local adjusted rate versus what would a uniform rate have been.
Right. Okay. Senator.
Thank you. That was part of my question, is that this doesn't assume changes to the income sensitivity,
Correct.
the exemption that we'd be talking about or anything. And one of the concerns, and I feel like I need to talk this through with you more, maybe not live on YouTube, but I'm feeling a little, so our current formula and our current tax system is, you know, it's complicated and all of that, but it is elegant in the way that it equalizes things, including people's tax rates across communities. And I am concerned about how we continue to be able to do that with a uniform tax rate, or if we're able to do that with a uniform tax rate. And so that's why I feel like maybe I need to talk this through with you a little bit more, because I'm not quite, I mean, is a uniform tax rate equitable? It's equal, but is it equitable? And that our current formula does a good job of making things equitable, and I'm not sure that this does. So that's what I'm trying to wrap my head around.
Yeah, I think that was a question for you all. I'm happy to, we can certainly talk about it offline. And I think that that's sort of one of the big decision points that you have in front of you that you all are grappling with, right? Is what is the tax structure that is underlying the fully funding the education fund? And these are two ways of looking at what a uniform rate would have been.
And this is not adjusted for CLA. This is pre-CLA.
This is pre-CLA for
Yeah.
both.
So I mean, the CLA would continue to exist, or at least I don't think we're talking about removing that. So these would then be adjusted based on the,
Supplemental spending.
the appraisal, the property valuation in the district.
Yeah, but
And
if
it's
they're
relative to
Once it's on a cycle, then.
Yeah, it
there'll
would
be a
stay
lot
more
less
uniform.
CLA.
Well, I mean, the CLA would still exist,
Yeah.
but I'm still just thinking about, like, you know, obviously we all just went and looked at our districts because that's what human nature does, but. You know, just seeing like such a huge increase, for example, and it logically makes sense, a huge increase for Slate Valley. They are a district that spends a really low amount and haven't taken it, you know, advantage of taxing capacity to spend more. They've taken advantage of it to lower their tax rates, and that's completely reasonable. Given the, you know, income level of many people in that community, but that huge tax rate increase for them would be a really hard pill to swallow. And I know this is just looking at like this year's comparison. So, but I'm still trying to, you know, on it, when this is put into practice, like what mechanisms do we have to make sure that the tax rates are utilized
yeah.
appropriately?
Was not, this figures in the cost of present day income sensitivity, right? So this is the tax rate, but it's not the tax bill that somebody who is income sensitized would get. We spent a lot of time, and I'm trying to see which day we're going to do it this week. But we spent a lot of time on Friday, and I think we asked Julia to do
That's
multiple
after this section.
after this section.
So once this section is tied out, then we're moving to that section.
Because that's the new
Tied it out today.
proposal. We can stick with the present system. Or there are several proposals out there for a homestead exemption, which seems to be easier to understand. If it's more equitable, will probably depend on if your taxes go up or down. But in the eyes of the beholder, but it is another way of calculating the balance between property value and ability to pay, which is what the goal when Act 60 was done, was that the majority of taxpayers would pay based on their income. And I think we were at something like 70 to 70, no, it was at least 70, may have been higher. And it has dropped into the 60s, probably because we haven't tweaked out the housing values, if nothing else. But so that's the question we're grappling with on this one.
I want to build off Senator Hardy's point, if I may. I share your revelation and concern. I don't know if it's a revelation for you, but last Thursday, I started to realize what the net effect of this in a current trajectory is going to be. The districts that have been underspending are now going to get a higher tax rate, and they're going to get more money. So we're telling the Slate Valleys, the Berries, the pick the town that has traditionally voted down budgets, your taxes are going up because we're setting this at funding current 100% cost factor. And I also worry that we're simultaneously taking away voter involvement in these decisions. Because if we give them all this money, they're not going to have that outlet to vote on that budget, to craft that budget. So maybe they will be able to influence the new districts. But I feel like the solution or the alternative path is to leverage, to solve that, to correct for that, is to not do 100% cost factor, but instead to do an adequate amount to turn by evidence at what it takes to educate kids out there, and then leave it to each district for that supplemental district spend and equalize if they choose to spend more than that equalized amount. Then we equalize that through one of those other ratios, because otherwise all we're going to do is raise taxes on the communities that traditionally vote their budgets down. They're going to get more money. And then we're also going to give a tax discount to the communities that have been traditionally spending more money. They're also going to get less money. But I feel like the solution is to have a foundation, which that word foundation with 100% cost factor, this isn't a foundation. This is a total, it's the whole house, we're building the whole house. But if we make it a foundation, a really high foundation, like what other states do, like 85, 90%, and then leave the difference to be localized to just so that they'll only feel it in the districts that approve it with that equalization amount, then I feel like we might accomplish the goal. Am I making any sense?
I understand what you're saying. I don't think it would accomplish. I would have a problem with that, because what it is saying is the state is only responsible for funding 85% of what we think is adequate. And then the rest of it is up to districts, and some districts will spend it and some districts won't. And then we're immediately in a Brigham problem.
I'd rephrase it this way. Sorry.
And so I think what I'm trying to understand is, a tax rate, it's supposed to be a uniform tax rate. And, I know you put the adjustments in there so that they're not all showing up as uniform.
That's Senator Gould's hand.
Can I finish my
Yeah.
sentence, please? So if you're looking at a tax rate of 17373, is it equitable to say the tax rate in, I'm just going to pick on these communities because the tax rate in Stowe is the same as the tax rate in Whiting. Is that equitable to say that? And I don't know. That's what I'm trying to sort of wrap my head around. And because that's what led to the court case, literally from Whiting. And yeah.
The second goal of this is to provide every student with a good education. And I still would like to see the towns that are doing a good education. I've been told Enosburg used to be the poster child.
Yes.
But arguably, are those kids getting the same exposure if they aren't using the tax capacity to provide special help to kids who we say need special help? Then are those kids being treated justly? Or is our supposition wrong? Do they not need special help? And we could do away with the whole thing. That's probably an education question. I've got Martine.
I have a follow-up to Senator Hardy.
Now you're on the screen. I can see you.
Can't hear you. There you go.
Thank you. Yep, I was getting my little cursor over to the audio button. Thank you for calling on me. And this is a great conversation. I'm glad we're having it. I wanted to sort of follow up on what Senator Chittenden was saying. I sort of had a similar revelation this weekend, and I I think I kind of came to the point with my district where I'm, I feel like I need to tell people, I don't see a universe where our per pupil spending isn't going to be lowered. So our taxes may come in a little bit lower, our tax rate, but I also think our per pupil spending is just going to be lowered no matter what, because we are a district that has been spending more. We do pass our budgets. And in this equalizing formula, or this, this foundation formula that we're going to be putting in, I just don't see where we aren't going to drop down in terms of our per pupil spending. So, yeah, it was really just trying to tag on to what Senator Chittenden was saying, that there's got these tax implications, but also this per pupil spending implication, which is going to play out in a very interesting way around the state.
Can I quickly, really,
Yeah.
okay, on what Senator Hardy said, I wouldn't see it as just setting it at 85% of what we believe it costs to educate a kid in Vermont. Instead, to build off what Senator Gulick just said, in my mind, it's a matter of determining an appropriate amount to deliver a quality public school education amount, which I'm guessing is somewhere between 80 and 95% of what we're currently spending, which the assumption there is, and this is what I said the other night, the assumption is that maybe we are spending too much in our schools today in Vermont. And if we agree to that, then we could set it at what we think, and based on evidence, what it would cost to educate our kids. And with a new future state notion, if Burlington, based on the appetite of their voters, wants, or South Burlington, pick on me, where I live, wants to supplement and wants to spend above that, as long as we equalize just that option through some Brigham calculation as we're contemplating, then I feel like we're Brigham compliant while we also involve the voters, so that we're not doing.
But doesn't the bill already do that? Because there is a supplemental funding formula part of the bill.
But the key point for me is right now we're
Yeah,
at
we
100%
decided.
funding. So what that 100% is doing is it's still spreading. So all of these low spending districts will see their property tax increases. But if we find an evidence-based amount that's at $1.20 or $1.25, that is empirically derived, not that we're targeting it, but that is justified based on what the evidence shows us, that's where we set the amount. And then if districts want to spend above that, like some do, South Burlington involved in Burlington, as long as we equalize that through the state guarantee or the recapture rate, I think we're Brigham compliant and still meeting our objectives. The last piece I'll say while I have the floor is the biggest argument I heard from both Scott Beck, Kurt Wright, as well as others. I think even Senator Baruth said this on the radio, that the merit of the foundation formula is to better connect with voters with the consequences of their spending decisions. My biggest concern with this is I don't think we're doing that. And with this, we're taking a lot of that say out of voters' hands if we fund it 100%.
But this is not. This is based on the cost right now.
Yeah.
And I think one of the premises we went into this with is we are spending on a national standard significant out of the box more on our students, on our education system than all the other states. The goal is to go from this cost-based model to an evidence-based model, which says, but to do that, we have to find a way to transition into the savings.
Yeah.
And the primary way that we've been told we can do that is we're going to have to go bigger. Probably not Chittenden County. Maybe you've got a neighborhood school somewhere. But some of our smaller districts, we are going to have to combine in order that you don't have 5 principals for 300 kids, that you don't have a superintendent for 300 kids, that you don't, the evidence model, according to the people that are promoting it, says that we could give every kid more. The kids in Slate Valley or Barry City have the same right to advanced math or science or technology or arts or music or anything as any other kid in any other district. So that's where we're trying to get in the future state.
Sorry, right there.
The road to the future state is a bit foggy. And, I feel like we are looking for Shangri-La wandering through the mountains of Tibet. But we have to faith we'll get there. It's not worth it. These numbers are probably irrelevant to the future state because by the time we get there, these school districts won't exist in the present form. Chittenden County may be one school district.
Right.
I agree. I think that it will be very problematic to show a Slate Valley at an enormous increase. And I think funding the foundation at 100% is, I don't think any state's even come close to that. I'm not sure what the highest is, but I think it's like around 75%. So that's
Wait, what do you mean by that?
that they actually would provide 100% of what a school district spends without a local spending, local
Tax levies in other states.
yeah, tax levy. So I think that all sounds right. As far as, the Brigham concern, I mean, if funding a foundation at 85 or 90% is a Brigham violation, then we are in a massive Brigham violation right now because our yield is only probably 60% of what the average district spends. So we're in a, but I don't think we are. As long as that supplemental spend, as long as there's an equalization ratio, I think we're fine. As to the question that Julia threw out there of do we do a uniform rate or a uniform homestead and a uniform non-homestead? I would really hope that we would do a uniform homestead and a uniform non-homestead. It gives us two levers. And I think it's pretty well understood that the non-homestead and the commercial tax base and valuation does not necessarily go the same direction as residential goes, or in the same magnitude. And I would really worry that if we got into just using one, if one took off, I think that would be very hard to work with. So I would really argue for a uniform non-homestead and the uniform homestead instead of one.
I think it's been assumed in both of the other things that they would be the same as, well, to be the same as present law this year, which varies by town. And then going forward, no one has broken them out into any kind of tax rates because we don't know what we need to raise. So we don't know what levers we're going to need to pull.
So,
Martine, is that a new hand?
It is. Just briefly, sorry, Julia, I'll be short, but I just wanted to reiterate what Senator Cummings was talking about in terms of capacity and scale. We're still not bringing down education costs if we're not looking at the cost pressures, deferred maintenance, healthcare, inflation, mental health supports that we're paying for. We also, we haven't talked a lot about getting back to like a meat and potatoes public school system. There are pressures on the ed fund that come from early college, dual enrollment, adult education, money that goes to private schools. And I'm not talking about our 4 academies, outside of our 4 academies. And again, just the mental health supports that are extraordinary, and therapeutic schools, a lot of money going to therapeutic schools. So until we deal with all those other things, I don't see our cost pressures going down. Thanks. I'm done.
No, no, there are cost pressures in the schools.
So one piece that I was gonna say to help, from my perspective in terms of grounding the conversation into what I've heard from the chair, sort of like these distinct buckets in terms of thinking about, and I recognize that they're all very interrelated, right? The rates are dependent on how much needs to be raised. The bill itself, prior to coming to this committee, had a uniform rate that would be adjusted per 4 factors, right? The 3 non-homestead factors and the homestead factor. Because you all made the decision to move away from implementing that change and moving that into a study, now the question is on the table. Are there, if the assumption is that you want to have a uniform homestead rate and a uniform non-homestead rate, that is a decision point in itself from my perspective. And then the next decision point is there any decision right now, one way or another, how those are set in relation to each other or not. But first it is a decision point to staff. Are you agreeing to have a uniform homestead rate and a uniform non-homestead rate?
Okay,
So I mean, I heard what Senator Beck said. What's the, there's the 2 different tax rate or the 2 different classifications, homestead and non-homestead. But within those, are you asking, would we have varying rates of homestead and varying rates of non-homestead? Or,
I mean, these are all policy choices. What I'm asking is, because right now you don't have a way to distinguish within non-homestead. Right?
it's whoever declares their homestead.
It's
everything-
homestead is the homestead declaration. That's the homestead property. Everything else is not homestead. So my question is there one uniform rate, homestead, non-homestead? Would they be saying that the same property tax rate? Or would it be homestead would be paying one rate? Non-homestead was paying a different rate?
Do we have to make that decision at this point?
That's completely up to all of you.
I mean, that's just the decision. It seems I would agree with Senator Beck because those are the only 2 levers that we left
Yeah.
because you didn't want to include the new classifications in there.
No,
We don't have the ability to.
polling this year. We're going forward with the 2 classifications. When we come back in January, we will have the report that will tell us how we break those out, how we deal with the multi-use units, how, if we deal with outer state, in-state, how you define. But I guess for me, originally, we set the non-homestead, and you'd have to look at, within that non-homestead, how would we divide it out? But that's been our lever. And that could be our lever to get, as we move from the present state to the future state, we have timelines in both bills.
Mhm.
The Senate is more aggressive than the House. But I'm not sure until we get closer to the future state and we have actual numbers as to this is what the district size is going to be. This is how it can be organized. We're not gonna be able to expand, contract, or do anything with schools in the near term. So I think in the near term, we probably are gonna have to say, we're gonna be looking at that non-homestead in whatever form as a way to help fund that transition.
So am I correct, for instance, looking at the two sets of modeling and looking at the two sets of modeling that I showed today, one being a uniform rate for everybody, and the other being a uniform homestead rate, and then a different uniform, perhaps different uniform non-homestead rate? Am I correct in understanding that that is the direction that the committee wants to move right now?
I don't know that anyone
That's my question.
wants to. John, you have something?
Yeah, I just, the course of the conversation suggests to me that you want to maintain a possible separation between the two rates. You're asking because you're waiting on your information that lets you know something like the second model, which is this homestead rate and a slightly different non-homestead rate. Or you could receive information back that makes clear to you, you could just provide outright one uniform rate across both classes of property. So what I'm hearing, but I don't want to dictate to the committee, is that you want two different rates, but not to specify what the relationship between them might be. Unlike, so right in the current draft, we have like different factors, and the idea that in the future you would say non-homestead will relate in this way to homestead, and this particular class will relate in this way to that class. What we would do here is just set out that there are two rates, but not explain how they relate to each
Yeah.
other.
I think until we get closer to the future state, we're gonna have to get the numbers. Next year, we're gonna have to set the tax rate as we move into this. We're also gonna have to deal with whatever our economy looks like and our revenues. And then we're gonna know what we need to do, and we'll be looking at the cost. We'll know what the cost of health insurance is going to do this year. We'll know some of those blanks, and then we can start.
That's a very related point, if I may, and this is really brought out now, so this reduce the likelihood that we're here late on Thursday. One thing that I think the House did not do that I think we definitely should do on this, personal opinion, love to hear your thoughts. I really like what Senate Ed did with the phasing of the amounts going out. So the 75, 50, and 25 over 3 years. What I don't see in the bill that we have is for these benefits, tax rate and benefits and tax rate increases, a similar transition. And I'd love to model it after what the Senate Ed did, which would affect, is that something that we wouldn't want if this all happens?
Step tax rates up or down,
Correct.
and the same way we're stepping funding the schools up and down,
So I
so
don't-
that
yeah.
you won't suddenly get a 30% increase and a 30% decrease. That you'd step down at 5% and up at 5% a year, or whatever the percent. Once we know the numbers, but that we would walk your tax rate down and walk your tax rate up. Because a 30-cent increase is going to cause extreme sticker shock.
I just don't want to ask John to do that Thursday night at 10 PM. So if that's,
Do them off.
Sharon.
Okay. That Martina doesn't have her hand up.
Yeah, that transition that the Senate committee put in is kind of the only thing that they did I do like in the bill that they did. But John, I have a question for you, is the House version included the 4 classifications and then included the ability to set them relative to each other, but it didn't require that they be set relative to each other.
That's right. And sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I'm John Gray, Office of Legislative Counsel. You know me.
It's nice to meet you, John. That's right. So it didn't require that they be relative to each other.
It didn't specify what, and what it did is just a factor of 1 for each. So in effect, it was a uniform rate.
Right.
And it just applied across different classes of property. But the thinking, of course, was that you would, in the future, with greater information, set rates relative to each other.
Right, but they could evolve and
They
that
could,
the same rate, they
Exactly.
could be uniform or they could be
Right.
distinct. But since we only are apparently gonna have two classifications potentially,
Well, that's,
then the ability to set two different rates is kind of similar to what we have
It-
now, basically, like.
exactly. And I wouldn't do it in a table like, the thinking behind the house is that you have a table that includes the homestead in the three different categories of non-homestead classification. And the thinking was that there might be in the future a fixed relationship among the different categories of non-homestead property, but that each year the legislature, much like it has today, would have the ability to shift liability between non-homestead and homestead rates by changing or notwithstanding the factor for the homestead rate. So in effect, it was saying we're going to continue to, the thinking was that you might continue to tweak the relationship annually between the homestead and non-homestead rates. So it doesn't make sense to have a table for something like that. You would just,
we could do that now. These are the gears Senator McDonald used to talk about.
She's mentioning Senator McDonald, I think you missed it.
He was the muse when it came down 60,
You're just
he
chopping up.
had it memorized and he knew why they did everything. And I'm probably glad he's not here to watch us destroy his life's work. But
It's the ball.
we did set that ratio. They would increase as school spending went up. The non-homestead goes up at the same ratio. I'm not sure how that got calculated, but we have done some balancing over the years. For now, I don't see, we aren't setting a tax rate for next year. We will have more information in January. I think what I'm hearing is we want the ability, we're not yet, we want at least two levers. And we want the ability to make adjustments in the future. But to make those decisions now, and we want a transition formula for the tax rates. We have a proposal just for the schools getting more or less funding. We would like a similar transition for the tax rate. Is that?
Yeah, I think we need a vote.
Can I make one other similar point?
Yep.
So I respect why you did the penny discounts, because that makes a lot of sense. It's in law right now, but as I understand the timeline contemplated by both Senate Ed as well as the House, as I roll it out, that the pennies, if I'm not mistaken, go away FY 29 and to be down to 20% in FY 28. So I think it's fine that you did it, but I'm just wondering with it, if this were to take effect, the pennies effectively gone, do you think it's worth modeling without the pennies? Just to get a better feel for what this actually looks like?
That's up to you. We don't know what tax rates will be like in FY 29, even if the current system existed, right? We don't know how sales and use is gonna perform. We don't know spending.
But if I may, in your tables, which I love the table, love it in standing Excel too, it'd be great. Right now with the pennies, you have variable rates, and I feel like as this circulates around the building, I think it will be easier to explain and contemplate if those rates are all the same, because that's what we're contemplating here is a universal homestead, universal non-homestead rate. And if there's an agreement that the pennies are phasing out a long time when this is contemplated to take effect, it might be a better apples to apples type comparison for people to consider.
I can certainly do that. The consideration is the pennies cost money, right? So the uniform rate, if there were no pennies, could be lower because you would be pulling more from the districts with the pennies. So the question is then, when looking at FY 25 current rates, should the pennies be added back to those current rates, right? Because if you have a district that may have 10 cents off their FY 25 current law tax rate, but if you're assuming that the cost of that cent discount no longer exists in a uniform rate, then you can have a lower uniform rate. So,
I think this might be getting too into the weeds with the present rates. The house is.
The house is
So your
here.
token session must be a token.
Oh.
but, I can talk offline about
But
it.
I think, I mean, we're talking apples and oranges here. We're talking, if we applied the rate, it's illustrative. It helps us see what we knew, that the low spenders are gonna go up. It gives us, in some cases, a shocking amount, and that the high spenders are going to go down. We know that the high spenders are not going, they're still gonna want their sports complex, and they're still gonna want, okay. How we deal with that will be future. We have to account for Brigham. So we have not got to, we have Brigham and the equalizing mechanism, and do you allow spending over and above? And we have our next topic, which is the equalizing, which is the homestead exemption or the present income sensitivity. Both goals are to kind of equalize one's ability to pay with one's property value.
The only point I really hope I made with that previous, I'm fine with leaving the pennies in, but I feel like there's a revelation that's going to occur with many of the 180 legislators that what we're contemplating is a new common universal statewide base tax rate. And with the pennies adjustment, that is somewhat lost in the communication, but I'm fine with that.
I wouldn't go necessarily handing this out, but,
Sure.
because it can cause panic.
Yep.
Before there's reason to panic,
Understood.
and the Senator Brockton.
Earlier in our discussion, we used the term evidence-based quite frequently.
Yes.
In the last 15 minutes, I've not heard that at all. The thing that worries me probably more than anything else, as we talk about fixed rates for multiple districts, is the performance levels of these in the fundamental thing that we're trying to do is educate kids are wildly disparate. There's some people who spend the same amount of money and get entirely different results.
Yeah.
Both at the high level and I suspect also at the low level. And one question is, how can we tie what we're doing to evidence-based? If you give, and some of these are money-based, but some of them are based on other factors that have nothing to do with money, when we have wildly disparate results, spending the same amount of money, both up and down. And I'm not sure, are we looking at that somewhere? It's not necessarily us, because we're not the committee of jurisdiction that looks at education, but when we're spending money, they ought to be looking at the performance that we get with what we spend.
All I can tell you is I have heard from the Agency of Education, who's really the agency charged with ensuring that kids are getting educated and that they aren't, that you aren't over and under. I have been told that we don't have a lot of accountability in this state, that needs to be tightened up. Now, how we can have them in, but I think, yes, as part of this, the expectation is all kids are going to get a good education. Some of them, we're quite sure, are not getting it now, not a good education in respect to what is needed to be a productive human being in today's world. We are not living in our agrarian past. And I would like to know what how many low spending, low or high performing schools we have. One of them may just have a couple of gifted teachers or a gifted superintendent But how do we learn from them? And
That's though, is the issue of performance based.
yeah,
And theoretically, the Department of Education is doing that. My suspicion is they're not effectively doing it.
I don't think they have the staff to do.
Because, we've looked at this in past and we've had situations in which there have been very low spending, not just schools, but low spending districts with high performance and high spending districts with poor performance.
It's also extremely variable based on the types of students you're talking about. You know, poverty is a huge
Mhm.
indicator and I don't know if this is still true, but for many, many years, that the number one indicator of us or correlate is the mother's education.
Mhm.
And so they're just different students from different circumstances around the state. So just looking in a vacuum,
Well,
comparing
the vacuum
districts.
would have to be, I
is
think, a
not-
relatively large vacuum.
Well, I
You know,
mean,
there's
there
different
has to be taking into consideration and holding things equal, like holding poverty equal, and things like that.
How do you define success? Since we don't
Mhm.
rely on, and we are getting off. We can write into this our intent to have our standards high and enforcement of those standards.
Or at least know the results. In
Mhm.
other words, know where we have a problem, know where something isn't measuring up to what we want and what we're spending and hope to achieve for that spending.
Well, some of that stuff was in the bill, in the House version of the bill, and then our Senate Education Committee took it out, so.
We'll put it back. Okay. So. On property tax calculations,
I'd say from a,
we know, we know that we are going to have a problem with low spenders are gonna see if we do nothing. If we just put a statewide tax in today. Based on what we're spending today. That low spending towns would see some of them a significant increase. And high spending towns would see a decrease in their tax rates. They probably will also see a corresponding increase in their funding and a decrease in their funding.
Tracking with their tax rates.
The goal is that every child has the same access to the same amount of funding within the state based on that child's individual needs. But until we know the districts, and so we know what kind of property wealth we're dealing with, until we know the homestead exemption or that equalizing thing, until we know the recommendations and how feasible it is. Right now, all the bills hold homestead and non-homestead. In the future state the same. But we're, I think, all reserving the right to adjust those rates based on the reality we're seeing when we get, I keep seeing linking up with the spaceship or something. But when we get to the future state and we link up, we will have to make decisions about how we balance out that tax rate.
Okay, so what this comes back to is, I think, the evidence base versus the cost function, and I just brought up Tammy Colby's slide, and I guess this question might be for, I think John might be familiar, he's in the room. But there were really, that one slide talks about the ways to do it, which is professional judgment panels, input-based, evidence-based models. This is from Tammy Colby, evidence-based models, and then there's education cost functions. Okay, so she did the education cost function. I understand what they did, but there was agreement that we wanted to go to evidence-based. What's unclear to me, because what I heard you just say, Madam Chair, is how we tweak this, how we adjust this. I'm just gonna go back to legislators are all generalists and I don't think we're expert, maybe Senator Hardy is, but other than that, you know this material better than a lot of people. I wonder, did the House or the Senate Ed, do they have, because in that same slide, it says it's accepted practice to pair evidence-based with professional judgment panels to estimate costs, sort of adding a body to tune these things that is not 180 legislators. Is that in the House version? Okay, they have a
Yep.
professional judgment panel.
So what I can offer on that front is that they have their rollout starts with a cost factor foundation formula, right? And then it proposes to transition to an evidence-based model. The transition to the evidence-based model is based on meeting particular contingencies, among which is one that professional judgment panels have developed and assessed that evidence-based model that would be rolled out.
I like the contingency piece too, because my other worry I'll bring back to our earlier discussion, which is very germane to this, is if we go forward with this foundation, but then the school districts don't get consolidated. I'm not even gonna say I think we'll be in the same situation. I think we'll be in worse because
Well,
the districts that get the benefit are gonna be demotivated to try to take on, to expand their arms around their neighbors without some sort of Montpelier directed school district rationalization.
No, I actually,
Okay, you're okay.
I mean, I think everybody so far has kind of left it to, there will be an organic change.
Right.
Once they see that they can't do it on their, but
I don't think it will.
I don't, that's not the
I
House
don't-
version
I
of the
don't-
bill, though.
I do not,
Well, for districts that are
Yeah.
getting a rate decrease, or,
Right.
yeah,
so,
Which are the high spending districts.
but which districts, at some point, I have said. In the commission on future public education, one thing I think we agreed upon is. It is not fair to ask a locally elected board. To vote to do something that will cause their friends and their neighbors to stop talking to them.
Yeah, we have to do.
And they will. So we have got to give them enough leeway. We've got to decide what decisions they make, but we've got to give enough direction before we leave here next year so that we can achieve that, because if that was the mistake we made with Act 46, we didn't follow through. We left it at emerging school boards,
yeah. there was some-
thinking that they'd figure out how to close schools and that they'd, get rid of 5 principals in 10 miles. And they didn't do it. And so we have to but we're gonna have to deal with the school construction issue. Because we can't make them do it if there's no place to consolidate the kids.
Sorry, did you make this decision?
From a staffing perspective, I'd say so.
You checked it off your list, Julia?
To the extent I'm keeping a list, yeah.
So what are you thinking? Would that be a statewide homestead and statewide non-homestead? Is that
I mean,
what decision?
yeah, the decision that we were talking about, whether we have a uniform homestead and a uniform non-homestead, but the ability to have differences between the two,
Yes.
like we have
Yeah.
now.
Right.
And I think that's the only thing. I still need to talk to you a little bit more about the tax rate things. I'm not wrapping my head around it correctly, I don't think, but.
Absolutely, yeah, I would say that, from my perspective, from staffing perspective, one of the big question was uniform homestead, uniform non-homestead, potentially could differ. That's determined at some point in the future. And then just presenting the modeling, just to show you sort of what it would look like, happy to talk offline.
Yeah.
Does that mean, would you like to pivot the final topic on the agenda?
Yeah, I think we're not gonna make a final decision on those property tax calculations until we know basically everything else.
We do like the transition mechanism to mirror,
Mhm.
okay.
Yeah,
We'll have to think about, yeah.
Yeah,
we can-
I mean, even if it's our intent to put in a transition model so that nobody's tax rate would go up or down more than.
Try not to have to do legislation on Thursday night.
No, for sure. I appreciate it. And part of why I pause is just the difficulty of thinking about raising. You're holding a fixed cost, right? Like we have to generate these particular revenues and then you're differentiating the rate that each would. It feels complicated to me mentally, but it's better to know now than.
We did it during Act 46. We rolled it in. And
Good.
Okay.
From both approaches.
I think that,
There
I
are
think that,
differences.
I think that the big piece here is that Act 46 and Act 127 have cent discounts. When thinking about a percentage difference, that's where we really introduce challenges because, you know, the property taxes are that flexible lever to fill the education fund.
We could do it on a cent basis. But I'm not sure what that would be, but
Think about it.
We can certainly think about it.
I mean, we don't have to make a final decision before we go home this year because this year.
Yeah, rate transition could be for next year.
Yeah.
And the
the more
other,
we put off till next year, I can remember the second year of the biennium goes really fast.
It is hard.
I'm gonna look my voters in the eye and say, this is what I voted for. If it's overnight major property tax rate change, that would be.
No, it's
Harder.
not.
Oh, yeah, I get it.
so we can think about a said transition mechanism and work with some of you, maybe touch base with tax in terms of administration and feasibility of doing that. Absolutely. And I think just a reminder in terms of setting up the tax rates, the language does maintain, and this will also hinge on some of your decision points over the coming days, but it does maintain a December 1st letter where there will be information coming out. And as long as property tax are the flexible lever in order to ensure the education fund is fully funded, they will need to be calculated annually. So this conversation has been, I think, has addressed a lot of the bigger picture questions in terms of the property taxation.
Okay.
I just thought of something that I thought about this the other day is reserve funds. Right now, individual school districts have reserve funds that they can use similar to the way we do it to buy down property taxes or to save money for school construction projects, school maintenance projects. They have different types of reserve funds and they're all subject to different requirements. Would school districts still have reserve funds and how could they use them? They wouldn't be using them to buy down their property tax rates anymore. Because we would be setting their property tax rates totally. But could they, if, for example, a district doesn't spend that much money right now, gets more, and they're like, oh, wait, we have all this extra money, let's put it in reserves. What could they do? Does that concept still exist?
School
And would they use it? Yeah, I mean, school construction is one thing that they could use it for.
Except
Yeah, defer to John on that one.
Yeah, we don't have anything in the bill that speaks specifically to this, but that is also say it also doesn't, as far as I know, repeal anything that currently authorizes that
Yeah.
to occur. But we don't have anything that speaks to restrictions on uses of the funds that you receive, for instance. So it could be that the foundation amount you receive has to be spent right. That's not something that's mandated, but you could have choices as to how you do this. So I would say the bill is agnostic as to the approach on the reserve fund. But
Because I think their ability to have reserve funds is still really important for financial management. And they could save it for, it could be another mechanism to save for school construction costs.
And if school construction costs, if it turned out that the only way funding could be raised for it, which we don't know, is through the supplemental district spending, and that's capped at a relatively low figure, you would almost have to have people save money.
Right.
But the
But that-
accountability, we need to track that because we need to know that school is producing what our standards say they produce. And if they are, they're still saving a lot of money, then maybe we need to go in and we should find out what they're doing, but also reassess our base rate.
Well, yeah, I mean, and the mechanism, what there was a mechanism in there's a mechanism in current law and in the House version of the bill, Senate Education Committee took it out, to recalculate the weights of base, every 5 years.
Yeah.
And that is part of what it does, is to say, oh, well, actually, it's too high now because we can achieve those efficiencies. We can lower the base rate, or we can lower the weights because whatever,
Do we want to put that, well, we'll decide that
Well,
tomorrow.
I think part of it is because the Senate Education Committee did a sort of mix and match foundation formula, and it's hard to recalculate weights that are just kind of pulled out of a hat, so.
Right. But I think also, and we're running at the same thing, there's a lot of things, we'd like to spend a week exploring, and we have an hour.
Martine has her hand up.
Martine,
I just think the question of a reserve is a really good one, because our school district almost always has a reserve. And I mean, are we going to make a judgment as to whether or not that's sound fiscal policy? Because actually it is. So I do think it's something that we need in this bill. And I think it's important that districts have the ability to have a reserve.
okay, I think that may be more detail than we need to get into this year. If we can set the rates in the base,
But it fits exactly into our earlier conversation, because that's what I expect will happen, just knowing human behavior and the proclivities of these districts that are now gonna have a higher tax rate and more money. That doesn't mean they're gonna all of a sudden change their approach to school government, to what they spend. So I think they're gonna accumulate lots of resources in reserves, because they're not necessarily gonna just go on a spending spree. I think the real answer is what you just said, Madam Chair, which is thinking of a base amount that is evidence-based, that is 85, 90%. So if they do want to spend more, they have to ask their districts to do so.
well, I mean, to me, we're giving you a base and weights that says this is what the evidence says it costs to produce, to educate your students well. It's going to depend, and we probably should write it in here somewhere, on the Department of Education being staffed adequately to evaluate and to set up an evaluation and an enforcement system, because if you're just putting the money in the bank and you're not hiring an English as a second language teacher, and you're not providing any extra counseling for the kid who just lost his entire family in a car accident, and you're not, providing any special ed, and your test scores are, no one is, what are we now, competent? No, proficient, yes. If no one's proficient, then that's the time. There is a thing for the department to take over school management.
There is, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you shouldn't, I think.
I think that tomorrow we're slated to get into the in-depth conversation
Yeah.
about the foundation formula, right? So,
And yes, we're slated to do the homestead exemption.
and, right, that's what, and I would love to talk to you.
Yeah. But it probably, if it isn't in there already, would behoove us to have a section that talks about the importance of standards and evaluations and actions. That this is a transition, but we do need to monitor whether or not we got the numbers right. And we do need to monitor whether or not our kids are coming up in proficiency, no matter how you measure it. I'm not sure
Are our
what,
kids graduating? Are
yeah,
our kids doing well on standardized tests? Are kids advancing to other occupations or colleges? Are they completing?
That's it.
And whatever we do and whatever we set as measures ought to be publicly available and distributed, as opposed to in the vaults of the Department of Education. Where if we can find it, it's good, or in a pile of stuff that goes to legislators who don't typically read it all.
What are they required to be able to do in order to graduate?
So
Like I've got Martine and then Senator Hardy.
This is a little aside, but I'm getting a lot of emails about the sparsity weight. And so if we could at some point address that, that would be really helpful. And I think people are ill-informed, but it would still be helpful. Thanks.
And that's not on the agenda for today, but we will get to that.
Yeah, I think that a lot of this is on the agenda for tomorrow, to focus on the foundation for law. So tomorrow to focus on the base, the weights, which would include the sparsity weight, and then the supplemental district spending. Would it be helpful? Do you want to, I'm hearing people talking about the homestead exemption. Should I pivot to those?
I think we've decided, I think what we've asked to see go in here right now is see if we can't put in a transition for tax rates. If they are X% apart, we want to step them up or step them down from the prior year's tax rate whenever we pull the trigger on this. That it for now. And then
And that's helpful because you have transition on the agenda for later this week, on Wednesday.
we'll see how we're doing it, remembering what we did.
Okay, your staff is taking copious notes during the
Good.
conversation. So not totally, slightly shifting gears,
Yes.
still within the world of property taxes. But now moving to the homestead exemption. So on Friday, the committee asked for me to come back with some modeling with that proposed structure. The slides are posted on the committee page under my name. The first slew of them are going to, I'm not partisan. The first slew of them are, I actually didn't update that outline. All the same, just so that they're all existing in the same place, a review of the property tax credit. What a homestead exemption is. I'm not gonna go through all of these unless that's helpful.
Okay.
The same modeling assumptions that we've used here, applying the property tax credit in the same year that it's earned, comparing against current law estimated property tax bills. We're using the same filer groups that we've been using throughout the session, only looking at households up to 115,000 of household income. This is the same table looking at the filer groups. We're still comparing against the same net education property tax in fiscal year 25, using those assumptions, right? That the property tax credit is applied in the same year that it's earned. So this is what we're comparing against when we're looking at how people would be impacted. Do you want me to go into any more detail about all of those? Those are all familiar.
No.
Okay, so I did two iterations, which I've titled A and B, just for simplicity, reflecting the conversation. So this is homestead exemption A. So this was requested by the committee to put these different, change the household income groups into these brackets. And then have this corresponding house site exemption. You also included a house site cap. That's what exemption B is. It applies a house site cap on top of this exemption. But
400,000? What are you?
yeah,
for?
this homestead exemption A does not use a cap. That's coming later in the slides. This is if there were no cap, but if this were to be the structure.
Okay.
Right, so 0 to 25,000 in income group could exempt 70% of their entire house site. 25,000 to 40,000 could exempt 60% of their entire house site. So doing this modeling is estimated to cost approximately 26 million less than income sensitivity would under current law. right? So before we were looking at a cost of 45 million more than income sensitivity, so this would be less costly than income sensitivity under current law.
Okay, we lowered the percentage
So
you were able to deduct.
Correct, you've lowered the percentage exemption. There are all of the modeling we've looked at in the past, I put in the appendix of the slide deck. I didn't assume that the 26 million was used to lower tax rates for the same reason that Senator Beck.
Hamster wheel.
So we have to hold in our mind that this exemption would cost 26 million less than current law. This is the graphic, right, the step structure. And this is the impact. So
Wait, I'm sorry to stop you there because I was reading that 26 million. It's 26 million less than current law, not 26 million less than the House's version.
correct,
And the House's version is $45 million more than current law.
correct.
Wow, that's a
Yeah.
huge difference.
But this is without the cap.
And this is without the cap, yes, so the House's proposal starts at 95% of housing.
Yeah, so we have room to move here because there's a lot of losers in this if you scroll forward.
Well, we are going to have to reach consensus with the House and Senate Ed before we leave this building. So
Well, yeah, but I mean, and just in terms of trying to minimize losers without spending more than
Right.
current law, we have $26 million. Like,
So what you're seeing here, same way to read this chart as we've read earlier charts, blue represent a decrease in the average tax bill. White represent an increase in the average tax bill. So the way to read this is if your household income is between 0 and 25,000, then you would see an average increase of $59. And this is the more granular look. So what you see is that the households, the lower income households and the households with lower property value would see decreases. The higher income households would see decreases, and also the households with above 500,000 below would see decreases. The others would see increases. Shall I keep moving forward? Alright. So homestead exemption B, following the exact same structure as homestead exemption A, that the only difference is now I've applied the house site value cap. Right, so this has been applied in the way that the committee was talking about it. You can apply the house site exemption on the first 400,000 of your property. So for instance, if your household income was 20,000, then you could exempt the first 400,000 of your house site by 70%. This is estimated to cost 61 million less than current law income sensitivity.
I
wow,
wasn't looking to save money.
how does it jump that much? Why does, even from A to B?
Yeah.
With just the cap, it saves
Yeah.
that much money?
35 to sure.
That's surprising because under the House's version, just putting the cap at 400 saved to $10 million.
you might want to check as to where those houses are. They may be clustered in, I think there's 7 ski area towns.
Confident are you, Julia, in that number that percolated on your Friday discussion about the cap just saving $10 million? As you redug into these numbers, would the cap actually in Friday's scenario save more than $10 million? Because this is 35 million by applying the cap, which is proportionally much larger. You understand my question?
I do. I'm happy to revisit it. That was modeling done on the House Ways and Means back a couple of months ago. I'm more than happy to revisit it.
And I would echo Senator Hardy's point is with 61 million, I would love to fluctuate some more to give that to those lower income individuals in a similar way to where the house is. I'm not trying to, how do you do this hamster wheel over and over and over again? But I wonder if we restore
Yeah.
some of those with the cap, can we get it to a 0 increase in the relative to the PTC current amount. Does that make any sense with that statement? I feel like I'm just babbling.
Could you say that one more?
Yeah, so I'm, similar to what Senator Hardy said, I'm now seeing that with these new numbers, that $61 million could be reconsidered, reapplied to this in a similar way to the House by raising those amounts. That's 70% to that step function.
Deduct at the
Yeah.
lower end, you
Yeah.
can deduct 80%, not 70, what, and the House had 90?
And we can also be more granular, not jump to 25,000 right away too, because that first row is where the problem has been. Those first couple rows all along, so we do like 0 to try to write it out again to 10.
I like the cap of 400,000, and then I'd like to just have it be revenue neutral. So not cost us more than what the PTC currently is and not save us money so that we're sort of holding harmless the current system.
I'm basic question, assumptions. Right now, people could choose to pay on their income or their property value. And I think we've seen in the past that for some lower income people, it's better to pay on their property value if it's low. Are we figuring paying on your income here? Is that, I don't think, is that going to be an option in the future state, or is it just your income determines the percentage of your?
So the way that this is currently structured is it would be repeal of the current income sensitivity. So this is replacing current income sensitivity with a homestead exemption that would be based off of your household income.
Okay. So different calculation.
I wonder,
Okay, is the pay more, pay less based on this year's? On the income sensitivity? What you'd be paying under the present system? The blue people would be paying less than they are under the present systems. Okay,
is it possible to sort of I think reiterate a little bit what Senator Chin was saying?
Trying to say.
Yeah, it was saying to stay within the current dollars, but use it all up with the $400,000 cap and see how much we can erase some of that white or blue out some of that white, especially at the lower income levels, like it may be going down.
So with yes, I can work on that. One of the questions is how important is uniformity across steps? Like, do you always want it to be a step down by X%? Like, right, because you're introducing that question of how big of cliffs and where are the cliffs?
Yeah.
What does the step structure look like? So if you wanted to target only the lowest income, then you could have a really high exemption, a much higher exemption for the lowest income folks compared to the others. But then you would see,
Then you'd have a cliff.
this step function would not look like this. It might look something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think having those kinds of flip are not a good thing, because then you can have $1 more in income or whatever, or a house $1 more in value that you fall off the cliff. So I like the steps better.
could you do smaller steps at the bottom?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, and you could start at instead of going to 0 to 25, you can go to 0 to 10 or 0 to 15 or whatever. But I think the more uniform it is, the better, I think, but I
How many people in the 0 to 10 income paying property taxes? Do we know? I assume we know.
Yeah, right there, 40, 730 and 97.
730.
like what Senator Hardy said, I'm not trying to send to the.
So, but that group is kind of the outlier. They're very small.
Yeah.
So put them together. And then maybe step it down to where are we, the 30,000? It's the,
Yeah, the 730 and 970, you put them together at 0 to 10,000. And
Yeah.
that combines those two. I think, and rather than giving you like specific instructions about where it's because I don't want you to come back with something that we're like, no, tweak this thing.
So if you had to choose between blue and smooth,
Blue.
like,
That's a good question. I think
which would you choose?
Blue.
probably blue, but as long as the cliffs aren't too big.
I want to see more blue.
Right.
I mean-
I'm not joking here.
No, I agree with you.
but
It also,
lower
you
end.
don't want to have the like
Yeah.
weird incentives to not take a raise or not put a porch on your house or something. I don't know.
And the other thing, I'm glad Jake's in the room, if I may, the original proposal from the administration had that thing for seniors. So if we're playing with 61 million, I don't know how that would
That's
work.
the other thing you could do.
But we use some of that 61 million. I'm just thinking of the,
I'm just gonna reiterate what I said to you about that the tax bill that S 51 has a lot of tax relief
Yeah.
for older Vermonters in it. So depending on how all that,
And also for lower income Vermonters.
yeah, but I mean,
I see increase, right?
yeah, there are, that, anyway, it
Yep.
feels like that is, and this, yeah. But
Did you try to model what it would look like if we only protected the people that actually benefit from the existing PTC program?
I did not. And I did not because I don't know how to set that structure up.
Because it's based on family size and children.
No, it's based on whether their PTC credit is less than or greater than or equal to the extra rate they pay right now.
It's getting kind of,
I mean,
but that, you would have to somehow model the hamster wheel into that.
no, I want to do things.
I know, but in order to.
So
it sounds like we may use some really tiny steps down. Combine the first two income groups and then tiny step them down. To where they get to a group that's,
So are you interested in continuing to pursue a homestead exemption and exploring a different structure?
What do you mean?
Like,
I'm ready to support a version of this,
Yeah,
okay,
a version of this that just gets more blue.
yeah, I'm with Tom.
The only way to get blue is to get white.
that's
I
true.
mean,
Well, no, we have $61 million. That's what,
Well, we're supposed to be saving what we spend now.
but I think that the point, the House's version spends $45 million above what we're currently spending. So if we can just get back to spend what we're currently spending, then we're sort of even in terms of the money, but have a potentially more rational system. I don't know. So that's
60% of the people that are in the system are already getting a benefit from it. That's not a rational system.
Would you agree that this new contemplated system might give us more rational controls over addressing that in years to come than our current lag PTC? That doesn't work with our new foundation.
Homestead, a house site exemption is far better than what we have.
But I also don't think that that's an entirely accurate statement, what you said, because my understanding, and turn around, you guys have it, like you make the adjustment, people get the one that is better for them, whether they pay on income or pay on.
Right.
On their property value, assuming they filed for the credit, right?
They're unfair to many of those people.
Okay. In We're hitting a decision here. I want to write, okay. We have decided that we want to go to a homestead exemption, right? Okay, so that's okay. Then we are still playing with white and blue shaded areas. Have we decided that we want to spend the same amount we are presently spending?
I do.
Or would we like to reduce it a little bit? We would like to see more blue area and smaller steps at the low income level.
What I would say to that is, I do agree that there are things we could do to reduce costs in the system. I don't think the best place to take it is out of our income sensitization. I think it's in the consolidation of districts, the efficiencies through administration, curricular depth. So that's where I'm not looking to squeeze money out of the system, out of less income sensitizing our approach. That's my personal opinion.
This is the equalizer. So I'm gonna let it, Julia's gonna bring us back another blue shade, gray shade.
Yeah, I have another question on that, if I may. Does it matter where the blue is?
I prefer it be with the lower income, and that's what I'm after. So those,
I think that's where they like to
To
see.
ease the pain on the lower income folks.
Across all house site values?
I think we
Which
said
parts?
the
The
410.
left-hand upper left-hand corner is probably the most
That's-
important.
I want to know what is that
The
for
low income
one
people
person
with
there?
low value.
I wish this was blue. So I almost want to,
Wow.
I wish like all the blue was up here. But I think you would need a proportional ratio and that would make it more involved. And I don't think Senator Brock would get it. Because up here, you're gonna have the lower income individuals, and as they have higher houses, they would pay more, but. Am I wrong? Isn't this who we care the most about? We care about all the Mars, okay, but we're thinking about income sensitization.
Yeah.
I think we'd like
that-
to, I think we
yeah.
don't want to see white in those top groups.
Yeah.
I
Okay,
don't want to add complication to this, and this is just an aside, but messages get sent by color. Blue doesn't mean anything, light green does, means it's good. Yellow means it's getting dangerous, and red means it's bad. And some
Okay,
people
so
read
put
charts.
the blue over there where the numbers are and put the green.
Poor Julia, she's got.
One of them,
Are there
one of
color
them had
guidelines?
red on it. One of the charts had red.
The administration's chart had
Probably
red
can't
and
even
green.
raise the issue, but it does, people do
I
make conclusions based on what they see.
hear you. I can certainly
Don't
adjust
worry about it.
colors. The only thing I will flag is all of the charts thus far have had this
I
color.
know.
So
Don't worry about it.
I will also say, depending on where I am, I get different color guidance. So I never know.
We've gotten used to this one.
Yeah,
Okay, so if you change it, then you'll have to explain it to us all over again. I want to know, what is that little one?
$3 increase.
We'll take that one.
Yeah.
That's
On average.
on average. If we can calculate that close. Okay, so should I go plant new bushes or just let them rot and see if I can get in and out of the $3? I think we have done our task for today, have we? I'm looking at the task masters. Tomorrow, we will have more fun.
From the
Are you ready to do your thing? Okay.
I gotta say, when Senator Mathis is around, we're quite efficient.
That goes
He's
top
definitely the
so
one
much.
that's like derails us.
As a chatterbox.
Okay, so.
Okay. What do you need?
On so many things.
No, you said this was simple and little.
It is, and then my laptop powered down, so really.
You need a power
hoping
cord?
it Does, well, thanks to Jake. For the record, Rebecca Samra, Deputy Commissioner of the Tax Department.
Jake Feldman, Senior Fiscal Analyst, Tax Department.
And I can send an attachment around, like, right after I show it to you guys or the committee page, but maybe in the meantime, Charlotte, I could grab the Zoom link, like, of course you did.
Are we talking about number 1 and number 3 and that?
Yeah, you wanna
Can I
give a
launch?
high level, yeah, you launch, I'll show.
Sure. So we'll show the language in a second, but the House passed, I think that's where the language came up is that basically the tax department would take over a function that AOE has been doing since Act 60, which is directing property tax revenue from towns to school districts. And that is a complicated endeavor. We don't do anything like that now. There's much more to it than just that. There's a lot of balancing of ed fund money. We don't want to take it on. We want it to stay with AOE. We appreciate that. We appreciate that some people in the House think that we're talented and competent, but that's an AOE function. So the first bit of language, I think, is about that. We would like that to return to AOE.
I think it was a compliment to you guys. I think.
If anything, is that it?
Our colleague Abby Shepherd made us a helpful side by side. So that the piece that Jake just described is down here. This is a side by side comparing the 454 Senate Ed amendment to what we would suggest changing. So I'm just gonna
You can tell she's worked for Ledge Council.
So these instances that you see highlighted of Secretary of Education is where the current H454 transitions these responsibilities to the Commissioner of Taxes.
Besides being incredibly talented and highly respected, which is absolutely the truth, I think what also might be weighing in, which is top of my mind, is all I keep hearing about how this agency of education is understaffed, like to the point where they've been gutted since 2008. They just don't have the capacity. I haven't heard that about the tax department. Do you understand the point I'm trying to make?
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly speak from that we are maintain adequate staffing in the tax department, but we want to speak to anything as an agency. But that work that's work that's happening under current law today for this fiscal year. I personally would not have concerns with having the agency continue those roles.
Do you see my point though? If anything, they're trying to lighten the agency of education's load since they are taking on a lot and they seem to be understaffed relative to the tax department.
Yeah, I mean, it's just really not, it's very different than any work that we do. So I can understand that. I think there's a lot of departments and agencies in Vermont state government that have problems, but that doesn't mean that the tax department should take them on. Like it sounds similar, like, oh, property taxes, that has to do with taxes, that has to do with the tax department, but it's really quite different. I think we would need at least one more person. Like I can't do it myself.
Do you know where in the bill this language is, what section or page?
Yes. This is section 36 in the bill, and I think there may be another section. Sorry to, it's not that on section 6.
Education thing, page 77 of the House version. So, no, it doesn't. Look like that section changed it to you.
Yeah, I'm looking on page 76 of 9.1. Is that where you're looking at?
I'm looking at the passed by the House version.
Oh, this is as amended by Senate Education.
I'm looking at,
Next bill. Sorry.
Thanks.
in the. I'm looking at page 76 of, I think I'm looking at page 76 of H 454 passed by Senate and.
Yeah.
That's existing law.
It's on the bottom of page 77 if you're looking in the Senate Ed
Okay.
version, and it's just a request not to update current law from Secretary of Education to Commissioner.
I'm not against this, but I'm wondering, will Zoe come in, Secretary of Education, Saunders, she will come in and make the case to definitely make this change to get it on?
We don't have time.
And I offer where I think this to have originated from, which is the way I had understood this was a directive from Ways and Means, thinking that it was intuitive to house this functions as part of tax rather than a burden lifting request.
I get this, you guys do the.
No.
You guys do the tax rate. This is
just
just the education spend. Okay.
This
Yeah.
is like,
Okay.
you know, town of Hartford, you owe
Yeah.
this much money to your school district, and you owe this much money to the ed fund, and you owe this much money to your.
You don't want to do that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we don't want to do that. It's a major orchestration of things. It's unlike anything.
But you'll still determine the tax rates.
Oh, yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
This is just who
Who pays what?
ships the money.
What John said, I'm fine.
Who ships it all. Okay, so we'll do that.
Request.
If
Yeah.
Ways and Means wants to scream, we'll fight it out in conference.
Yeah, and that's part of the ask. I would love for
Yeah,
this to
I
be
mean, we're
discussed.
asking
if it's
enough of you
gonna be
right now.
transitioning. Yeah,
All right,
that would be a great conference. This one's pretty straightforward, hard to tell what it's about based on this highlighted change of 1 year. But this is now ancient history. In Act 183 of last year, the legislature created an education fund advisory committee that had a lot of like parallel responsibilities with the Education Commission that's currently active, and also some additional like recurring every 3 year responsibilities like weighing in on weights, on potential property tax credit reform, on, you know, a lot of the things that are just happening right now as part of the legislative process. And the Commissioner of Taxes is committed to calling the first meeting just in a couple months in July 15th. So you know, I think it's a bigger question, like what we want this group, what the policymakers want this group to do. But we would ask at the very least that it just be bumped to next summer. Because we have a lot of fun things to do this summer that feel a lot more relevant.
having dealt with the commission who is going through in the time frame we set them, trying to come up with recommendations. And my mantra last summer was the legislature is going to act next year. The pressure is so intense that we will do something. And the challenge is going to be to make sure they get coordinated. And it hasn't. I mean, the commission is working very hard, but I've asked this, what are they supposed to be doing? This one to me would be the same kind of thing until we get to the future state. I mean, there's just so many things up in the air this year. To have them try and make any recommendations or decisions just seems premature.
Yeah, I mean, I think this makes sense to move it at least till next year, maybe even till 27. But this was a thing that actually in the Senate version of what was to become Act 127, the People Waiting Study, this was a group that we established, and it was actually Senator Brock and I came up with it. It was partly because it was supposed to be an accountability oversight over the education fund. It was sort of like the December 1st group, but a little bit expanded, and also supposed to recalculate weights and do a lot of the sort of oversight that doesn't seem to exist across agencies all the time with the ed fund. And then it didn't get included in Act 127 in the end. The House took it out. And then it got put back in last year after the sort of ed fund kind of blow up last year. So I think it's an important accountability mechanism for the long term, but I agree that it's not necessary yet. So I think it's moving out state. at least a year. Or even the last time you sort of know what things are gonna do happen. Because right now, there's not anything for it to do.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel, we wrote in 2026 here, but certainly open to a different future date, that feels most relevant for y'all.
I mean, I think 27 could even make sense.
Okay.
But
Can I ask a question?
Yes, there you are. You're a little bitty again.
Yeah. Does the existence of this group hinge on the existence of the commission?
no, this
No.
group was created before the commission was a thing,
Okay, thank you.
and they have a different function too. It's supposed to be much more about finance stuff.
So we agreed on 26 or 27 on this.
26.
26? Okay, we'll
Nice
move it out.
revisit.
If we have to, we'll move it out next year.
Thank you.
Okay,
There's one more thing that I'm really just like effectively queuing up for, John, because this was a more heady legal conversation between our two legal minds. But there is some wording in section 36, that you'll see to the left. And, the department's recommendation was to replace a specific statutory reference with, broader language, the education fund, just to make sure that it was appropriately inclusive, and feel like John understands a lot more about this than I.
Yeah, I can explain this one. This is the language that's describing what you need to raise with your statewide education property tax. And so what you see in the Senate education proposal is a rate sufficient to cover expenditures from the ed fund under 16 VSA 4025. So that is your ed fund section. The request from tax relates to the fact that we may have instances in statute where we notwithstand the ed fund statute and have a one-off expenditure. And so you're trying to capture all expenditures from the ed fund. And if you had the cross-reference specifically to expenditures under 4025B, it would cut out those one-off expenditures. So it's just a request to make sure you pick up all expenditures from the ed fund.
okay.
Makes sense.
So are we agreed on the tax department's really heavy duty changes? All right. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, and those are our, super technical asks, and you'll have in the chair supplemental districts and anything else this week that you'll want we're here to help.
Okay, thank you. Committee, to wrap up, we have agreed on the regional assessment districts as presented by Kirby, and on the property classifications going to a study with the intent that we are going to have to make a decision once we have better numbers on how we're going to do tax rates and how, if at all, we're going to divide the non-homestead. Under property tax calculation, so far, what we'd like to see is a similar transition for tax rates as we have for school, getting school money up and down. And again, this is one until we get everything else set and get closer to the future state. But the numbers again today said that the schools that are low spending will see a property tax increase, and the schools that are high spending will see a decrease with similar amounts of money moving up and down. We have agreed to the miscellaneous tax changes that Kirby went over. And the homestead exemption, we're agreed that we are going to go to a homestead exemption. We're still looking for the final version to have perhaps more blue at the lower income level and some smaller steps up there, and then move it on out. And I think we just agreed to the tax departments. So tomorrow we're doing base and weights. We're having some committee discussion, and we're going to do supplemental district spending. So that's Tuesday. Yes. So tomorrow is going to be a pretty heavy duty day. But we have floor in the morning. Tammy can't be here. All right. So we've got Ezra and John, and Tammy can't be here until 1:15. Okay, so we will be starting at 1:00 tomorrow. Bring your lunch if you have to.